What if the most iconic structures in European civilization were not built for God, but for power? Not spiritual power, electrical power. What if every soaring spire, every precisely positioned stained glass window, every resonant stone chamber was designed not to inspire worship, but to capture, store, and transmit electromagnetic energy harvested from the atmosphere itself? Stand beneath the vaulted ceiling of any Gothic cathedral and you feel it. A presence, a charge in the air, an acoustic quality that makes your voice resonate with unnatural clarity. A sense that the building is alive, humming with something invisible yet undeniable. We are told this is the divine. We are told these structures were built to bring us closer to heaven. But what if the truth is more practical and more impossible? What if cathedrals are antennas? Massive, precisely engineered electromagnetic devices camouflaged as religious architecture, built by a civilization that understood energy science we are only beginning to rediscover today. A civilization that harvested power from thunderstorms, transmitted it through networks of conductive stone, and used it for purposes we can only guess at because the knowledge was deliberately erased. The evidence is everywhere, in the impossible construction timelines, in the mathematical precision of Gothic arches that follow harmonic frequencies rather than structural necessity, in the placement of every major cathedral at geological intersections where underground water and fault lines create natural electromagnetic anomalies, in the metallic components embedded in stone, in the acoustic resonance chambers hidden beneath floors, in the documented luminous phenomena that medieval witnesses described but modern historians dismiss. This is not speculation. This is engineering analysis. And when we examine Gothic cathedrals not as monuments to faith, but as technological artifacts, every anomaly resolves, every mystery makes sense, and the conclusion becomes inescapable. We inherited these structures from a civilization that fell before we could learn how to use them. And in our ignorance, we turned power stations into prayer houses, mistaking the tools of an advanced society for the temples of a primitive one. Let us begin with the most obvious feature: the spires. Towers reaching hundreds of feet into the sky, tapering to needle-sharp points, crowned with metallic crosses or rods. We are told these spires reach toward heaven, but engineers tell a different story. Cologne Cathedral's spire rises 515 feet. Ulm Minster reaches 530 feet. Chartres achieves 377 feet. These are not symbolic gestures. These are antenna heights, and their geometry follows principles of electromagnetic wave propagation with disturbing precision. Modern antenna design uses tapered structures to optimize signal reception and transmission across multiple frequencies. The taper allows the antenna to resonate harmonically, capturing wavelengths from low-frequency atmospheric signals to higher-frequency ionospheric transmissions. Gothic spires follow this exact geometry. They are not merely tall. They are mathematically tapered according to ratios that maximize electromagnetic coupling with the atmosphere. Even more telling is the metallic capstone. Every major cathedral spire is crowned with a metal structure, usually gold or copper alloy, positioned at the apex. In modern antenna design, this is called the driven element, the point where maximum current concentration occurs, the point where electromagnetic energy is either radiated or received most efficiently. Medieval architects supposedly chose to place metal at the highest point for symbolic reasons. But the positioning, composition, and geometry match functional antenna design too precisely to be coincidence. Then there are the lightning strikes. Cathedrals are struck by lightning with extraordinary frequency. Official explanations attribute this to height. But buildings of comparable height in the same cities are struck far less often. Cathedrals seem to attract lightning, as if they were designed to. As if the spires function as atmospheric collectors, deliberately positioned and shaped to harvest electrical discharge from storms. Historical records support this. Medieval chronicles describe cathedrals glowing during thunderstorms. Witnesses reported seeing luminous halos around spires, electrical arcs between metallic elements, and strange humming sounds emanating from the structures during atmospheric disturbances. Modern historians dismiss these as superstitious exaggerations, but they match precisely the phenomena we would expect if cathedrals were functioning as large-scale Tesla coils, drawing power from atmospheric electricity. Nikola Tesla demonstrated that properly designed towers can extract significant electrical energy from the atmosphere. His Wardenclyffe Tower was a spire, tapered, metallic-topped, grounded through conductive channels. It was an antenna designed for energy transmission, and it looked remarkably like a cathedral spire. Tesla was not inventing something new. He was rediscovering something old, something built into the very architecture of European civilization, and then forgotten. Now we must examine the stained glass windows. We are told they depict biblical stories for an illiterate population. But when we analyze their positioning, composition, and geometry, a different purpose emerges. Every Gothic cathedral features massive rose windows, circular stained glass installations positioned at precise orientations. Chartres has 3, Notre Dame has 3, Reims has 3, always at the same positions: west facade, north transept, south transept, always circular, always divided into geometric petal patterns following precise mathematical ratios. In modern electromagnetic engineering, circular arrays of dielectric materials positioned at specific orientations function as frequency-selective surfaces. They filter electromagnetic waves, allowing certain frequencies to pass while blocking others. The geometry determines which frequencies are transmitted, and the composition of the materials determines the filtering characteristics. Stained glass is not uniform glass. It contains metallic oxides: cobalt for blue, copper for red and green, gold for ruby hues. These metals make the glass conductive at specific frequencies. Each color filters different wavelengths, and when arranged in geometric patterns following harmonic ratios, the windows function as sophisticated electromagnetic filters. The rose window patterns follow sacred geometry, yes, but sacred geometry is mathematics. The divisions follow Fibonacci sequences. The petal arrangements mirror fractal antenna arrays. The radial symmetry creates omnidirectional reception and transmission characteristics. This is not decoration. This is engineering. Consider the orientation. Rose windows face specific cardinal directions with precision. The west window captures afternoon sun, but it also captures atmospheric electromagnetic activity from the setting sun's interaction with the ionosphere. The north and south windows are positioned perpendicular to geomagnetic field lines. This is not liturgical symbolism. This is antenna alignment. Then there is the acoustic-optic interaction. When light passes through stained glass, it generates subtle electromagnetic fields due to the photoelectric properties of metallic oxides. When combined with the acoustic resonance of the cathedral interior, these fields create standing wave patterns that can be measured with modern equipment. Medieval visitors described seeing light that seemed to vibrate, colors that hummed. They were not hallucinating. They were observing genuine electromagnetic phenomena produced by the interaction of light and sound within a carefully engineered chamber. Even more fascinating is the recent discovery that certain stained glass windows contain quartz crystals embedded in the matrix. Quartz is piezoelectric. It generates electrical current when subjected to mechanical stress or acoustic vibration. If the stained glass windows were subjected to the intense acoustic resonance generated by pipe organs or human voices singing in harmonic frequencies, they would literally generate electricity. The windows would glow not just from transmitted light, but from induced electrical luminescence. This explains medieval accounts of windows glowing during services, of light that seemed to come from within the glass rather than through it, of colors that intensified during choir performances. These were not miracles. These were the observable effects of a technology in operation. The interior acoustics of Gothic cathedrals are legendary. Voices carry with unnatural clarity. Organs produce sounds that seem to come from everywhere at once. Choirs achieve resonances that modern concert halls cannot replicate. We attribute this to brilliant medieval acoustic design. But the acoustics are too perfect, too engineered, and they serve a purpose beyond music. Acoustic resonance can generate electromagnetic fields through piezoelectric effects in stone and through the vibration of conductive materials. If you subject crystalline stone to specific frequencies, it generates measurable electrical current. Gothic cathedrals are built from limestone, which contains crystalline calcite. The entire structure is a piezoelectric generator waiting to be activated by resonant vibration. The pipe organs are not random. They are positioned at specific nodes within the cathedral geometry. Their frequencies are not arbitrary. Cathedral organs produce infrasound, frequencies below human hearing range, that propagate through stone more efficiently than audible frequencies. These infrasonic vibrations cause the entire structure to resonate. And when crystalline stone resonates, it generates electricity. Medieval texts describe rituals involving continuous chanting at specific pitches, often for hours. Monks were instructed to maintain exact frequencies, using tuning mechanisms to ensure precision. This was not worship. This was activation. The human voices, amplified by cathedral acoustics, were driving the structure into electromagnetic resonance. The vaulted ceilings are not merely aesthetic. Their geometry creates standing wave patterns. Sound reflects off the curved surfaces in precise ways, concentrating acoustic energy at specific points. These concentration points correspond to locations where metallic elements are embedded in the architecture: chandeliers, candelabras, altar fixtures, all positioned at acoustic focal points where vibration-induced electricity would be greatest. Even the floor labyrinths serve a function. Chartres Cathedral contains a labyrinth precisely 42 feet in diameter, positioned at the geometric center of the nave. Visitors are encouraged to walk it meditatively. But the labyrinth path is also a coil, a spiral conductor. Walking it while the organ plays, while the structure resonates, while electromagnetic fields pulse through the stone, would subject the walker to induced electrical fields. Medieval accounts describe labyrinths as paths to enlightenment, places where pilgrims experienced visions and revelations. They were not hallucinating mystical experiences. They were experiencing the neurological effects of low-frequency electromagnetic field exposure. Every major Gothic cathedral sits on a geological anomaly: underground water sources, fault lines, intersections of aquifers, ancient quarries, or locations with documented magnetic variations. This is not coincidence. This is site selection based on geophysical criteria. Chartres sits atop an underground river. Notre Dame is positioned on an island where 3 waterways converge. Cologne Cathedral was built directly above a Roman temple that itself was positioned on a pre-Roman sacred site, all exploiting the same geological feature: a massive underground aquifer intersection. Water moving through fractured rock generates electrical potential through electrokinetic effects. The flow of groundwater through crystalline stone creates measurable voltage gradients. Ancient civilizations understood this. They positioned temples and monuments at locations where natural earth currents were strongest. Gothic cathedrals follow the same principle. The crypts beneath cathedrals are not merely tombs. They are positioned at the lowest accessible point, in direct contact with groundwater or bedrock. Their walls are often damp, constantly in contact with earth moisture. This is not poor drainage. This is grounding. The crypts function as electrical ground planes, connecting the cathedral structure to earth potential and allowing current to flow. Many cathedrals have wells within their crypts. These wells are not for drinking water. The water is often stagnant or mineralized, but the wells provide direct electrical coupling to underground aquifers. They complete the circuit: spire to atmosphere, stone to ground, water to earth. A complete electrical system powered by natural geological and atmospheric sources. Recent electromagnetic surveys have detected unusual field patterns around cathedrals, localized variations in the geomagnetic field, anomalous electrical potential gradients, regions of enhanced ionization. These effects cannot be explained by the stone mass alone. They suggest that the structures interact with natural earth energies in ways that amplify and channel them. Even more intriguing are the dragon lines. Medieval maps and legends place cathedrals along specific routes called ley lines or dragon lines in various cultures. Modern analysis reveals these lines often correlate with geological fault zones, underground water channels, or mineral deposits. The cathedrals are not scattered randomly. They form a network, positioned at nodes of natural electromagnetic activity, potentially linked into a larger system of energy distribution. Now we must confront the timeline. Gothic cathedrals supposedly took centuries to build. but the actual construction periods, when documented accurately, are suspiciously short, and the techniques used are impossibly advanced for the official timeline. Chartres Cathedral was rebuilt after a fire in 1194. Within 26 years, by 1220, the current structure was essentially complete. 26 years to design and construct one of the most complex buildings in human history, using supposedly primitive tools. No mechanized lifting equipment, no industrial logistics, no computer modeling, no standardized manufacturing. This is impossible. Modern engineers using laser measurement, computer-aided design, prefabricated components, and industrial cranes require longer timelines to build structures of comparable complexity. Yet medieval masons supposedly accomplished it with hand tools and wooden scaffolding. The precision is even more impossible. The Gothic arches are mathematically exact. The flying buttresses are positioned with millimeter accuracy. The load distribution is optimized to a degree that suggests computer modeling. Modern structural engineers analyzing Gothic cathedrals find that the designs minimize material while maximizing strength according to principles of topology optimization that were not discovered until the 20th century. How did medieval builders achieve this? We are told they worked through trial and error, learning from collapses and failures. But there is no evidence of such failures. The cathedrals that survive show no signs of structural corrections or repairs from design flaws. They were built right the first time, as if someone already knew exactly how to do it. Then, there is the synchronicity. Gothic cathedrals appeared across Europe within a narrow window, roughly 1100 to 1300. Dozens of nearly identical structures, following the same design principles, employing the same techniques, appeared simultaneously from France to Germany to England. This level of coordination and standardization should be impossible without centralized planning, shared blueprints, and trained specialist workers moving between projects. Some researchers suggest a lost blueprint, a single master design that was copied and adapted across Europe, but no such document has ever been found. Instead, we find the Gothic style appearing fully formed, already optimized, already perfect, as if it was not developed, but rather remembered or recovered from an earlier source. The tools also present problems. The precision stone cutting required for Gothic construction demands steel chisels, diamond-tipped drills, and mechanical saws. Yet the official timeline places these cathedrals in an era when steel was rare and expensive, diamonds were not yet used in tools, and mechanization did not exist. Either the medieval builders had access to tools we don't acknowledge, or the structures are not as old as claimed. When we assemble all the evidence, spires as antennas, windows as frequency filters, acoustics as energy generators, geological positioning for earth coupling, impossible construction suggesting advanced knowledge, a coherent theory emerges. Gothic cathedrals were not churches. They were power stations, components of a continent-wide electromagnetic grid that harvested, stored, and distributed energy. The spires collected atmospheric electricity from thunderstorms and ionospheric currents. The stained glass windows filtered and directed specific electromagnetic frequencies. The resonant stone chambers, activated by acoustic vibration, generated additional power through piezoelectric effects. The geological positioning provided grounding and coupling to natural earth currents. And the network of cathedrals, positioned along conductive geological features, formed a distribution system. This explains why cathedrals were built where they were. Not at centers of population, but at geological nodes. Not for access, but for function. The locations were chosen based on geophysical criteria that optimize electromagnetic collection and transmission. This explains the construction timeline. If the builders possessed advanced knowledge, if they were working from existing plans or recovered technology, if they had tools we don't acknowledge, then the speed and precision become explicable. They were not developing Gothic architecture. They were replicating it. This explains the synchronicity. If the cathedrals were part of a system, a grid, then they needed to be built within a narrow time frame to become operational together. You cannot have a power grid with half the stations missing. The coordinated construction was not cultural diffusion, it was planned rollout of infrastructure. And this explains the most troubling mystery of all. Why did Gothic architecture stop? After 1300, no major cathedrals were built in the Gothic style. The techniques were lost. The knowledge disappeared. Official history claims this was due to plague, war, and economic decline. But if cathedrals were functional technology, if they operated as part of a power system, their abandonment suggests the system stopped working. The atmospheric conditions changed. The knowledge to operate them was lost. Or the civilization that built them fell, and the survivors inherited structures they could use for shelter and ritual, but no longer understood. But there is a darker possibility. What if the electromagnetic capabilities of cathedrals were not merely for power distribution? What if they could also be weaponized? Electromagnetic fields at specific frequencies affect human consciousness. Infrasound causes anxiety, disorientation, hallucinations. Extremely low-frequency fields can induce trance states, suggestibility, altered perception. If cathedrals were designed to generate and focus electromagnetic energy, they could also be designed to affect the minds of those within them. This explains the religious experience. The sense of awe in a cathedral is not merely aesthetic or cultural. It is physiological. The electromagnetic environment, the infrasonic vibrations from the organ, the resonant acoustics, the piezoelectric fields generated by the structure itself, all combine to create neurological effects that would be interpreted as spiritual experiences by those who did not understand the technology. Medieval texts describe worshippers falling into ecstatic trances during cathedral services, experiencing visions, speaking in tongues, exhibiting behavior consistent with electromagnetic field exposure. We are told this was divine intervention, but it was technology, intentional manipulation of consciousness through engineered environmental frequencies. This also explains the power of the church. If cathedrals could induce altered states, if they could make populations more suggestible, more receptive to authority, more willing to accept doctrines, then whoever controlled the cathedrals controlled minds. Not through arguments or force, but through frequency manipulation that felt like revelation. The rituals reinforce this, chanting at specific pitches, processions following labyrinth paths while organs play, incense producing mild psychoactive effects, all occurring within an electromagnetic environment, optimized to affect consciousness. This was not worship. This was applied neuroscience. And if the technology could induce peace and suggestibility, it could also induce panic and violence. Infrasound at certain frequencies causes fear, nausea, loss of bowel control. Electromagnetic pulses can trigger seizures, disorientation, temporary paralysis. A cathedral operating at different frequencies, with different acoustic patterns, could become a weapon, a means of crowd control, a way to disable or terrify populations. Did the builders use cathedrals this way? We have no direct evidence, but we have accounts of medieval incidents where entire crowds suddenly panicked during services, where mass hysteria erupted, where witnesses described feeling overwhelming dread for no apparent reason. Official records attribute these to demonic possession or mass delusion, but they match the effects of weaponized infrasound and electromagnetic field exposure. The most disturbing possibility is that Gothic cathedrals were not originally designed by the medieval civilization that built them. They were reverse-engineered from pre-existing structures, recovered technology from a fallen civilization that understood electromagnetic science far beyond our current capabilities. The Gothic revival was not innovation, it was reconstruction. Survivors or descendants finding ruins of advanced buildings, not understanding their purpose, but recognizing their importance, and attempting to recreate them based on fragments of knowledge and physical remnants. This explains the sudden appearance of Gothic style fully formed. There was no gradual development because there was no original invention. The style appeared when someone discovered plans or ruins or surviving structures and decided to rebuild them. This explains the mathematical precision beyond medieval capability. The builders were following blueprints they did not fully understand, copying proportions and ratios that worked even if they could not explain why. This explains why the knowledge was lost after 1300. It was never fully possessed. It was partially recovered, applied during a brief window and then lost again when the source materials were destroyed, or when the last of those who understood died without passing on the knowledge. The pre-existing structures may have been the megalithic buildings we find across Europe, now ruined and attributed to Romans or unknown ancient peoples. Some show evidence of advanced electromagnetic properties, unusual mineral compositions, and positioning at geological nodes identical to cathedral sites. Perhaps Gothic cathedrals were attempts to rebuild these older power stations using stone and glass because the original materials or methods were no longer accessible. Or perhaps the knowledge came from texts, recovered manuscripts describing energy systems, antenna design, resonant chamber construction, medieval monks copying and preserving documents they could barely understand, occasionally finding practical applications, building structures based on instructions written by a civilization that fell long before. The timing is suspicious. Gothic architecture emerges shortly after the Crusades, a period when European knights and scholars had access to libraries and ruins in the Middle East and Byzantium. What if they found something? Plans, devices, fragments of a technology that once spanned continents. And what if they brought that knowledge back, attempting to recreate in stone and glass what they had found described in metal and crystal? If cathedrals functioned as electromagnetic power stations, then something happened that caused them to stop working. The system shut down. And afterward the structures remained but as monuments rather than mechanisms, temples rather than technology. What could cause a continent-wide electromagnetic grid to fail? One possibility is atmospheric change. If the system relied on harvesting energy from ionospheric currents or atmospheric electricity, changes in the Earth's electromagnetic environment would render it inoperative. Historical records show significant geomagnetic disturbances during the 14 and 1500s. Solar activity fluctuations. Unexplained auroras visible far from polar regions. Climate shifts that altered atmospheric conductivity. Another possibility is geological change. If the grid required specific underground water flows or mineral deposits to function as grounding and conduction networks, geological shifts could disrupt the system. Earthquakes in the 13 and 1400s altered aquifer patterns. Mines exploiting mineral deposits changed underground electrical properties. The network lost its earth coupling. Or perhaps the shutdown was deliberate. If those in power understood that cathedrals could affect consciousness, control populations, possibly weaponize frequencies, they may have decided the technology was too dangerous. Records were destroyed. Operational knowledge was suppressed. The structures were repurposed for safer uses, religious ritual rather than energy generation. And within a few generations, no one remembered what they had really been built for. The timing of the shutdown correlates suspiciously with the rise of centralized religious authority. As the Church consolidated power in the 14 and 1500s, independent operation of cathedrals would have been a threat. If local clergy could activate electromagnetic systems, influence populations, generate power without oversight, that would undermine central control. Standardizing cathedrals as purely religious spaces, removing or disabling the technological components, forbidding certain rituals or frequencies, would neutralize the technology while preserving the buildings as symbols of authority. There are also accounts of systematic removal of metallic elements from cathedrals during this period. Official explanations claim the metals were sold for funds or melted for weapons. But what if the removals were targeted? Taking down the driven elements, disconnecting the antenna systems, removing conductive pathways, ensuring the structures could no longer function as intended. We have traced the evidence through spires, windows, acoustics, geology, and history. The conclusion is no longer speculative. It is engineering fact. Gothic cathedrals were designed and built as electromagnetic technology. They harvested atmospheric and earth energy. They generated power through acoustic resonance. They affected human consciousness through frequency manipulation. And they formed a network, a grid that once powered or controlled a civilization we no longer remember. We inherited these structures. We worship in buildings we no longer understand. We admire architecture whose purpose we have forgotten. We call them sacred, and perhaps they are, but not in the way we think. They are sacred because they are remnants of knowledge, fragments of a capability our ancestors possessed and we have lost. The question is not whether cathedrals functioned as antennas. The evidence makes that undeniable. The question is what happened to the civilization that built them. Why did the knowledge disappear? Why were the structures repurposed rather than maintained? And what does it mean that we live surrounded by technology we cannot operate, inheritors of power we do not recognize? Perhaps we are like medieval peasants living in the ruins of Rome, using aqueducts as roads, turning baths into churches, completely unaware of the engineering sophistication of what we inhabit. We look at cathedrals and see beauty, history, faith. We do not see antennas because we were never taught to recognize them, but the technology is there, embedded in stone, waiting for someone to understand, waiting for someone to remember, waiting to be activated again. And maybe, just maybe, that is beginning to happen. Because researchers are measuring, engineers are analyzing, the electromagnetic properties of cathedrals are being documented, the acoustic effects are being tested, the geological positioning is being mapped, and slowly, piece by piece, the truth is emerging from beneath centuries of misinterpretation. Gothic cathedrals are not monuments to the past. They are messages from the past. Testaments encoded in stone that say, "We knew, we understood, we built." And you, who come after, if you are wise, you will learn to read what we have left behind. Not in books that can burn or text that can be suppressed, but in architecture that endures, in geometry that cannot lie, in technology waiting silently to reveal itself to those with eyes to see. The cathedrals stand, waiting, and the frequency is still there, dormant in the stone, ready to resonate again if only we remember how.